Hey, you guys. Today we're trying out a new segment where I like to talk about, because I'm such a nerd and I read this stuff voraciously, different things that artists think about other artists. Love that shit. I don't know about you guys, but probably if you're tuning in, you do too. So, today we're going to talk about Iggy Pop and Nirvana. We all know that Nirvana loved Iggy Pop. I think the Stooges' Search and Destroy, or that was a solo record by Iggy Pop. I think it was listed in Kurt's famous top 10 of all time albums list, which I think a lot of people know. It was in his journals, and I think it may have been a top 20 list, but I know that definitely Search and Destroy made it in the top 10. I think a Stooges album made it in the top 20. If I remember right, let me know below if I'm misremembering, but we all know that, of course, Iggy influenced the shit out of Nirvana. Let me redo that. I swore. So, Iggy influenced the living love out of Nirvana. There we go. We're trying to be PC here so that we can actually have commercials, which is great. So anyways, looking at this, Rolling Stone, we're looking at the greatest artists of all time lists. And this one was written by Iggy Pop about Nirvana. I would love to read some of it to you. But I'd also love to just talk about opinions with you and also talk about some of the history. I've read Come As You Are, which also includes the famous photo of Iggy and Kurt flipping off the camera, which Iggy says Kurt just walked up to him and said, "Hey, let's flip off the camera," which shows the attitude that this guy had. I mean, he was a really cool, kind of childish, but also kind of meta kind of character. Anyways, the first time I saw Nirvana was at the Pyramid Club, which is funny because I run Pyramid Studios, so that to me is really cool. You know, I love that name. A rank, wonderful, anything-goes dive bar in Avenue A in New York. It wasn't known for having live bands. It was more for cross-dressing and bar dancing. So ahead of its time, right? I had a photographer friend, and he told me, there's a really hot band from Seattle you have to see. They're going to play the Pyramid of all places. And you could smell the talent on Kurt Cobain. He had this sort of elfin delivery, but it was not navel gazing. He was jumping around and throwing himself into the number. He had a hunch over his guitar like an evil little troll. But you heard this throaty power in his voice, and at the end of the song he tossed himself into the drums. It was one of maybe 15 performances I've seen where rock and roll is really very, very good. And that's coming from Iggy Pop. So, I mean, we can say these two legends, they really admired each other. After that, I bought Bleach, and I listened to it on the Asia tour. I still like that album very much, but there was one song about a girl that really stood out from the rest of the album. It sounds like someone gave Thorazine to the Beatles. And I thought, if he puts out a record of that, he's going to get really, really rich. And sure enough, never mind. So I met Kurt at the club in L.A. right before Nevermind came out. We took a picture and he said, "Come on, let's give the finger." So we did. As I mentioned before, I guess that story is in multiple books. Very famous. I bought Nevermind and I thought, he's really got it. Nirvana genuinely achieved dynamics. They took you down. They took you up. And when they pressed a certain button, they took you over. And what I'm taking away from this writing is that I think Iggy Pop is a much more intellectual person than you thought. Right? He's a good writer. I actually find him really inspiring in the way that he writes. You can tell it's thoughtful. You can tell he put energy into it. You know, he's not just some burned out old punk. You know, he actually is very intellectual, and he's actually got a lot of thought going on in that head. They rocked without rushing, and they managed melody without being stupid. Or, no, I'm sorry, insipid. They were emotional without sounding dated or corny or weak. Sometime later, Kurt reached out to me, and I missed the call, and my wife took the message. Kurt wants to go into the studio with you. See, I'm 113 years old now, and I was 72 in the 90s. I mean, he's funny, you know. We all love Iggy Pop, right? That's why we love him. That's why we love the Stooges. And so he says, so I was going to bed at like 10 p.m., and he was getting up around 11. I did call him back a couple of times, but the number was for a Four Seasons in L.A., and I'd get responses like, Mr. Excuse me. Mr. Cobain has not left the hotel room for 3 days, or Mr. Cobain is trapped under the bed. As for his legacy, he was a Johnny B. Good. That's such a good comparison, you know, because Johnny B. Good is the original story about the hillbilly rock and roll kid who just has a knack, and just despite everything else, comes out of nowhere and makes it happen. And I think there's been a few of those, and I think they're usually coming out of Seattle, including Jimi Hendrix. He was he was the last example I can think of within rock and roll where a poor kid with no family backup from a small rural area with an affected serious emotional explosion in the significant sector of world youth. It was not made in Hollywood. There were no chrome parts. It was very down to its root. Somebody who is truly nobody from nowhere reached out and touched the world, and he may have even touched it right on its wound. And that last line, that just shows that Iggy Pop is smarter than I ever thought he was, because he literally that's poetic, this kid from nowhere, nobody from nowhere, went out and touched the world and touched it right on its wound, right on its heart, right on the wound. And I just thought that was so good. What good writing, and what a great way to put it. And that, I think, was Kurt's mission. It's hard to believe that these two geniuses got to kind of interact with each other and had so much respect for each other, because neither were threatened and both were down to earth. And I thought that was really cool. And there was a mutual respect there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know if you want to see more videos like this where we just kind of can discuss great articles about some of the greatest rockers of all time and what they thought of each other. Thanks so much. Cheers.